The first time I saw the cabins, they were already standing. 18 of them, lined up along the lake like a vacation resort, had been dropped into my childhood. Fresh cedar siding, black metal roofs, gravel paths, porch lights, even rental signs where my grandfather's old stone boundary wall used to be, and all of it was on my land. I told them to stop. The HOA president, Marlene Price, turned with a clipboard in her hand and said, "You don't own this shoreline. The board already approved the lakefront expansion." I said, "My family has owned this land since 1968. The developer laughed and said, "We have permits, investors, reservations, and HOA authorization. This project is finished." Finished. As if 18 cabins, a gravel road, utility lines, and a dock could erase a deed. 2 weeks later, I sat in county court with my grandfather's original deed inside a worn manila envelope. Across the room, Marlene was no longer smiling. The developer's attorney kept searching through his binder for a document that did not exist. Then my attorney slid the deed across the table. The judge read the legal description once. Then again, the room went silent. Because one forgotten paragraph, signed decades before the HOA existed, proved those cabins were not built on community property. They were built on my private lakefront. And by the end of that hearing, those 18 beautiful cabins were no longer a community upgrade. They were evidence. I was never the kind of person who wanted a fight with an HOA. I paid my dues on time. I kept my grass cut. I did not argue at board meetings or post angry messages online. After everything my family had been through, all I wanted was a quiet life in the one place that still felt like home. That place was a small lakefront property at the back edge of the subdivision, where the HOA streets ended, and an old gravel drive curved down toward the water. My grandfather bought it in 1968, long before the subdivision existed, long before anyone called the lake a community amenity. When I was a kid, that shoreline was my whole world. My grandfather taught me to fish there before sunrise. We repaired the wooden dock in the summer, planted small pines along the slope, and kept the old stone boundary wall clear of leaves every fall. He always told me, "Land is only yours if you can prove where it starts and where it ends." Back then, I thought he was just being old-fashioned. Years later, after my parents were gone and the house passed to me, I finally understood that land was not just dirt and water. It was the last physical piece of my family I could still touch. The dock still had his hammer marks. The stone wall still curved through the grass where he placed it, and his old deed, folded inside a manila envelope, felt more like a promise than paperwork. The HOA never cared about any of that. To them, my lakefront was wasted potential. At first, they were polite. Board members mentioned shared lake access and increasing property values. Then came letters asking if I would consider partnering with the community. One even suggested my private drive might have historical community use, even though no one had ever had permission to use it. I declined every time. I told them in writing that the shoreline was private, the drive was private, and I had no interest in turning my family land into a neighborhood attraction. That was when the tone changed. At the next HOA meeting, Marlene Price, the board president, called my land the disputed lakefront parcel. There was nothing disputed about it. I had the deed, the tax records, and the old survey. But she said it with such confidence that people started looking at me like I was the problem. Then the developer appeared. Grant Keller showed glossy renderings of lakeside cabins, walking trails, fire pits, and kayak racks. He called it Lakeview Retreat. He said it would bring prestige to the subdivision and help fund HOA improvements. People clapped. I sat in the back row, staring at the drawing, because every cabin in his presentation was sitting on my shoreline. That night, I opened my grandfather's file box and read the deed again. Everything still said the same thing. The land was mine. So, I told myself not to panic. But the next Monday morning, I woke up to chainsaws behind my house. And when I stepped onto the porch, I saw orange survey flags running straight through my grandfather's stone wall. The chainsaws were the first thing I heard. Not birds, not wind across the lake, chainsaws. I ran onto the porch barefoot and saw 3 men in neon vests standing near my grandfather's stone wall. One was cutting brush around it, another was hammering orange stakes into the ground. A yellow excavator sat beside the gravel drive, its bucket resting inches from the stones my grandfather had placed by hand. Then the first stone rolled loose. I ran down the slope and shouted for them to stop. A foreman stepped forward with a folded site plan in his hand. We're cleared through the HOA, he said. Lakeview retreat starts today. I pointed at the stone wall. That is my boundary. He shrugged. Not according to our map. Then he unfolded the plan. My stomach dropped. The drawing showed my house and backyard, but the property line had been moved nearly 200 feet uphill. Everything below it, the shoreline, the dock, the gravel path, the pines my grandfather and I planted was labeled as HOA Common Lakefront. It was like someone had erased half my property with a marker. I told him the map was wrong. I told him I had the deed, the survey, and tax records. He said, "Take it up with the board." That was when Marlene Price arrived in her white SUV, followed by Grant Keller in a black pickup. Marlene stepped out with sunglasses and a clipboard. I asked why contractors were on my land. She smiled and said, "This area has been reviewed. The board determined the lakefront is part of the community expansion zone." I said, "The board cannot vote my private property into common area." Grant laughed softly. "This is exactly why we tried to avoid involving you too early." Too early. They had known I would object. Marlene said the HOA had authority to approve improvements that benefited the neighborhood. Grant said permits had been filed, materials ordered, crews scheduled, and reservations were expected to open within the month. Then he looked at me and said, "You don't want to be responsible for delaying a 7-figure project." By noon, the first section of the stone wall was gone. By the end of the week, they had cleared the pines. The HOA sent me a violation notice for interfering with approved community improvement activity. They threatened daily fines, legal fees, and even a lien against my home if I kept confronting workers. Grant's attorney sent a letter too. It said any attempt to block construction access could expose me to delay damages. Delay damages. They were standing on my land, cutting my trees, and tearing through my family's boundary wall, but somehow I was the one causing damage. Every morning after that, I woke up to machines. They poured gravel over the old path to the dock. They dug utility trenches. They stacked lumber beside the lake. By the time the county finally returned my call, 3 foundations were already in the ground. The clerk said the permit package listed the HOA as the authorized land representative. The site plan showed the lakefront as common area. Someone would have to review the records. Then she said, "You may want to contact an attorney." At the next board meeting, I stood up with my deed folder and asked them to stop construction until the property line was verified. Marlene cut me off. "We cannot allow one emotional homeowner to hold the entire community hostage." Grant added that the project was too far along to pause over old paperwork. Old paperwork. That was what he called my grandfather's deed. I walked out shaking, but not because I was scared anymore. Because while they were building as fast as they could, they had made one mistake over and over again. They put everything in writing. The threats, the false map, the violation notices, the permit claims, the public statements, the construction schedule, the pictures of crews standing on my shoreline. And every single day, while they thought I was losing, I was saving all of it. That night, I wanted to do something reckless. I wanted to pull the orange stakes out of the ground. I wanted to stand in front of the excavator and refuse to move. I wanted to tear down their Lakeview Retreat sign and throw it into the lake. But I did not. Because the only thing worse than watching them steal my land was giving them a reason to make me look unstable. So I got quiet. The next morning, I stood on my back porch and recorded everything. I recorded trucks driving down my private gravel path. I recorded workers crossing the old stone boundary. I recorded the excavator digging where my grandfather's pines had been. I recorded Marlene Price walking the site with Grant Keller, pointing toward the lake like she owned every inch of it. Then I started saving documents. Every HOA violation notice went into a folder. Every email, every certified letter, every screenshot from the neighborhood portal. I downloaded the meeting minutes where Marlene called the lakefront a community expansion zone. I saved Grant's newsletter interview, where he bragged that Lakeview Retreat would open before summer. I did not argue with them anymore. When a dump truck blocked my driveway, I photographed the license plate. When the HOA sent another fine for harassment of approved vendors, I printed it and placed it behind the first one. Then I went down to the basement and pulled out my grandfather's old file box. It smelled like dust, cedar, and time. Inside were tax bills, survey maps, county letters, handwritten notes, and the original deed in a worn manila envelope. My grandfather had labeled everything in blue ink. Lake boundary, driveway, dock permit, stonewall, shoreline taxes. I sat at the kitchen table until after midnight, spreading the papers beneath the light. The deed described the property as running from the old county road, down the slope, past the stone wall, into the lake's ordinary high water mark. The tax records matched it. The old survey matched it. Even a faded county letter from the 1970s referred to the dock as part of my grandfather's private shoreline access. The next morning, I hired a licensed surveyor. He came out with GPS equipment, county plat maps, and the calm expression of someone who had seen this kind of arrogance before. For 3 hours, he measured the land while the construction crew watched him like he was trespassing. When he finished, he looked toward the half-built cabins and said, "You need an attorney." I asked, "How bad is it?" He pointed to the stakes he had placed. "Most of their project is on your side of the line." That sentence changed everything. My attorney told me not to confront anyone, not to touch anything, and not to threaten anyone, she said. "From this point on, your job is to document. Let them keep proving what they did." So I did. She sent a preservation letter to the HOA and developer, demanding that they keep every email, site plan, permit application, contract, text message, and board communication related to Lakeview Retreat. Within hours, Marlene emailed the neighborhood saying I was trying to sabotage a project that would benefit everyone. I saved that too. Then my attorney checked the county permit file. The application listed the HOA as the authorized representative for the lakefront parcel, but the parcel number did not match my deed. It matched an old common area map created years after my grandfather bought the land. That was the crack. 2 days later, the county clerk found a separate deed history under my grandfather's name, a deed history the HOA had never included. When my attorney called, her voice was calm, but I heard something underneath it. She said, "They didn't just build too close to your property line." I gripped the phone tighter. Then she said, "They built across it." The first time my attorney showed me the old deed history, she was quiet. She spread the documents across her conference table. My grandfather's original deed, the county tax maps, the HOA subdivision plat, the developer's permit application, and the glossy Lakeview Retreat site plan with the fake boundary line drawn across my backyard. Then she placed one page in front of me and tapped a single paragraph. "This," she said, "is what they missed." It was the legal description from my grandfather's deed, recorded in 1968. The language was dry, full of distances, bearings, and old county markers. But once my attorney explained it, the meaning was clear. My grandfather's property did not stop at the top of the hill. It did not stop at the stone wall. It ran all the way down to the ordinary high water mark of the lake. That meant the shoreline, the dock, the gravel access path, the trees they cut, and the cabin foundations they poured were not inside a common area. They were inside my private parcel. But the deed was only the first problem for them. The HOA's formation records showed several common areas had been transferred to the association by recorded deed: parks, walking paths, drainage areas, and a small boat ramp on the other side of the lake. My shoreline was not listed. Not once. There was no recorded transfer, no easement giving the HOA the right to build, no agreement allowing commercial cabins, no document showing my family ever gave up that lakefront. What the HOA had used was not a deed. It was a marketing map. Years earlier, a developer had printed a colorful subdivision brochure showing the lake as a lifestyle feature. One shaded area near my property said, "Future Lake Access." Marlene and Grant had treated that brochure like proof of ownership. My attorney almost laughed. "A sales brochure does not transfer land," she said. Then came the permit application. Grant's company had told the county that the HOA was the authorized representative for the lakefront parcel, but the parcel number attached to the application belonged to an HOA common area tract that did not include my shoreline. The permit had been approved using the wrong land records. That changed everything. This was no longer just a homeowner arguing with an arrogant board president. It was a construction project built on a false premise. The county had not approved cabins on my land, because the county had never been told they were building on my land. My attorney sent a demand letter ordering the HOA and Grant's company to stop all work, preserve every record, remove equipment from my property, and prepare to pay for restoration, tree loss, survey costs, attorney fees, and trespass damages. Marlene responded by calling my claim sentimental attachment to outdated paperwork. Grant's attorney was more careful. He said his client had relied on representations made by the HOA. That was the first crack between them. The developer had trusted Marlene. Marlene had trusted an old brochure. And neither of them had checked the one document that mattered. Then my attorney found one more issue. Several cabins had septic and drainage features too close to the lake under county setback rules. If the accurate boundary line was used, the cabins were not only trespassing, they were violating the environmental conditions of the permit. When the county received my attorney's packet, the story changed. The packet included the deed, the survey findings, tax records, photos of the destroyed stone wall, camera footage, HOA fines, and Grant's own public statements advertising rental cabins on land he did not own. 3 days later, the county inspector called. He wanted to meet on site. Immediately. And for the first time since the chainsaw started, Marlene Price and Grant Keller were not controlling the story. The records were. The county inspector arrived on a Thursday morning, and he did not come alone. He brought a code enforcement officer, my surveyor, my attorney, and a deputy sheriff who parked beside the gravel road the developer had poured over my private access path. Marlene Price was already there with Grant Keller. For once, nobody was smiling. The cabins looked almost finished, 18 clean little buildings with fresh porches, black roofs, and lake views they had no legal right to sell. A banner near the entrance said Lakeview Retreat opening weekend. The inspector looked at the banner, then at the deed packet in his hand. Before anyone speaks, he said, we are going to verify the boundary. My surveyor walked the line slowly, placing markers where the real property boundary ran, not where Marlene's brochure showed it, not where Grant's site plan claimed it. The real line from my grandfather's deed. Marker by marker, the truth appeared. The gravel road crossed my land. The utility trench crossed my land. The dock access crossed my land. And several cabins were sitting partly or completely inside my private lakefront parcel. Grant's face changed first. Marlene tried to interrupt, saying the HOA had relied on historical community use, and my attorney calmly asked her to identify the recorded easement. Marlene opened her binder. There was nothing. Then the inspector reviewed the permit file. The parcel number did not match the land where the cabins had been built. The site plan showed an inaccurate boundary. The septic layout also appeared to violate lake setback requirements once the correct line was used. The code enforcement officer wrote the order on site. Stop work. No occupancy. No rental use. No further construction. Then, the deputy sheriff told Grant's crew that entering the marked private parcel without permission could now be treated as trespass. Suddenly, the same workers who had ignored me for weeks started packing tools into trucks. Marlene whispered something to Grant, but he pulled away from her. He said, "You told us the HOA controlled this land." She snapped back. "Your people handled the site plan." Right there, in front of the inspector, they started blaming each other. A week later, the emergency HOA meeting was packed. Residents who had once clapped for Lakeview Retreat now demanded answers. Someone asked why the board approved a 7-figure project without confirming ownership. Another asked how much HOA money had been spent defending it. A former board member stood up and admitted he had warned Marlene months earlier that my shoreline had a separate deed history. Marlene called it a misunderstanding. But misunderstandings do not come with false permit records, destroyed boundary walls, violation notices, and 18 cabins on someone else's land. By the end of that meeting, the project was no longer a neighborhood improvement. It was an investigation. The first cabin came down on a cold Monday morning. There was no ribbon cutting, no opening weekend, no families drinking coffee on porches overlooking my lake. Just a demolition crew, a county inspector, and Grant Keller standing beside his truck, watching money disappear board by board. The cabins built on my parcel had to be removed. The gravel road had to be cut back. The utility lines had to be pulled out. The dock access had to be restored. And the ground around my grandfather's old stone wall had to be repaired under county supervision. Grant's insurance company got involved almost immediately. Once the deed, survey, and camera footage were reviewed, the question was no longer whether damage had happened. The only question was how much it would cost to fix. The destroyed boundary wall, the cut trees, the survey fees, the legal fees, and the restoration work all became part of the claim. The HOA had to cancel every fine they had issued against me. Every violation notice disappeared from my account. They also had to reimburse part of my attorney fees and pay toward the survey and restoration costs because they had signed off on land they never owned. At the next election, Marlene Price lost her seat. People who had once clapped for Lakeview Retreat stood up and asked why she ignored deed records, why she threatened a homeowner with liens, and why HOA money had been used to defend a project built on someone else's land. Grant's company lost deposits, the operating contract, and credibility with the county. As for me, I did not become rich from it, but I got my shoreline back. I rebuilt the stone wall as close to my grandfather's original line as possible. I planted new pines along the slope. I repaired the dock and put a locked gate across the gravel drive. Then, I placed my grandfather's deed in a fireproof safe. Sometimes, when I stand by the lake now, I still see the scars where the cabins used to be. But I also hear my grandfather's voice. Land is only yours if you can prove where it starts and where it ends. And he was right. I did not beat the HOA by yelling louder. I did not beat the developer by doing something reckless. I won because I stayed calm, saved every notice, recorded every trespass, read every line of the deed, hired the right people, and let the records speak louder than their threats. So, if an HOA, a neighbor, or a developer ever tells you your property is not really yours, document everything. Check the deed. Check the survey. Check the county records. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is not anger. It is one old piece of paper they forgot to read. And if you have ever seen an HOA try to turn private property into community benefit, leave your thoughts in the comments, share this story, and subscribe for more stories where quiet homeowners fight back the right way.